As promised, the developers of Paradox Tinto have delivered. Today we're going to be showing off how the army system works in EU5. And don't worry, there is no Victoria 3 system. It is pretty much copy-paste EU4 with improvements, significant improvements that we're going to go into, especially in the field of logistics and the available objectives that the armies have. Plus, I also want to make a little bit of a list of the strongest starting armies at the beginning of the campaign, because some of these nations might actually pleasantly surprise you, boys and girl. Now, this development diary is presented by Johan himself, and he mentions that as the decades go by, we tried to alleviate some of the concerns about micromanagement of military aspects. That being said, don't worry, there's going to be quite a little bit of micromanagement, but you can also automate it to the point where it doesn't get tedious. There's a perfect balance in between micro and macro management in EU5, that's for sure, at least from what I can tell from the dev diaries. He does mention this EU5 or Project Caesar combat is a result of multiple grand strategy games which have fine-tuned certain mechanics like the objectives that we have seen in EU4. For example, how navies could be assigned to patrol areas or blockade, or how an army could be set to siege a specific area. And then with Imperator, that was even more refined, where you actually have independent armies. You give your general a specific set of orders and he will just follow along with that, like either defend the border or carpet siege or whatever the case. Independent armies was the thing, and I kind of suspect that's going to be the case in Project Caesar as well, where you will have the ability to just let your general decide what's best to do with that particular army if you don't want to micromanage all of the armies yourself. And then I'm assuming based on whatever martial skill he's going to have, he's going to make better or worse decisions, right? He mentions that in the military view for your country, there is a tab for recruiting and overview of your units, and another tab for handling your objectives. You can also assign objectives directly to each unit you have selected, of course, as well as you can just do it from the objectives view, the objectives tab, better yet. You do that by selecting the targeted area, province, location, or sea zone, and then clicking directly on the map. So it's exactly the same like it is in EU4. If you remember how you can autonomously suppress rebels in EU4, and then you just select the specific provinces you're interested in, it's basically the same system in EU5. We have here the actual objectives that you can assign to your armies. We have blockade ports, that is obviously for navies, and then if you click the plus, it's going to expand and you have a few other options there. That's the overall based on which navies you want to assign to blockade ports. Then we also have carpet siege, and we have specific areas. So we have carpet siege Lithuania, Samogitia, and then you can decide which armies will be carpet sieging Samogitia and Lithuania. Again, this is placeholders, guys. I don't think that the particular icon for the armies is going to be the finalized one, or maybe it is, I don't know. I would like to see a little bit more individual icons, I guess. Maybe you could change the icons for the armies, that would be nice. Then you have the option of defending home territory. You click the plus, you can decide which home territory, and you can decide which armies to assign to that. Hunt armies in whichever area. So here we're hunting with the first armies in enemy armies in the Prussian and Mazovia area, so we're clearly playing as Poland here. Then we have patrol the seas in order to hunt pirates, perform army logistics, and perform navy logistics, which we're going to learn a bit more in a few moments, because Johan actually individually presents what exactly all these orders are going to be doing. So blockade port, self-explanatory. Carpet siege, pretty much what I just said. Take note though, the AI will split the armies you have assigned into smaller units automatically and move them around to siege or occupy as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So this is an improvement from the EU4 system, where in EU4 is basically one cohesive army. It doesn't split up and it just goes from one province to another. In EU5, it's actually going to split up into small enough units that it has the necessary units to siege the locations, but possibly, and this is just my assumption, not small enough that it's going to bait the the enemy into attacking them. Or maybe if it feels threatened that another enemy army is close by, these small units merge back up in order to make a bigger blob so they don't get wiped out. I guess, I'm assuming, considering how it's been with Imperator and E4 and everything, that would be a thing, right? See, it does also mention that they will attempt to flee with the armies if any hostile armies appear. Now, this is, of course, weighed on the size of the enemy army. I'm just assuming. I don't know. Defend home territory. They will attempt to protect the areas near the capital with the armies you assign. So that's the capital of the province you assign them to. Keep that in mind, because taking the capital of a particular province means that all of the other locations within that province automatically change occupation to whoever owns the capital of the province. So pretty much you just have to defend the capital in order to maintain control over the province, right? Basically the same system like we have in Imperator Rome. Hunt armies. The objective will use the armies you have assigned to attempt to find enemy armies and engage them if it feels that it can win. So only if it feels it's strong enough to live with, no, to destroy the enemy army. That's what I'm talking about here. Now, this is the army we have here. As I was saying, it's definitely the Poles. Hunting enemy armies over 80 locations. Locations under Fog of War 27. And then we also have locations where we have the enemy troops 1,100 in that particular province. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce the other one, 1,800. These are smaller hostile armies in... Okay, here goes nothing. Przasnysk's and Sierperka. Did I say that right? Polish peeps. I love you. Don't hate me. Patrol the seas and objectives that can be used in peace times. It will use the assigned navies to build up maritime presence as quickly as possible in the assigned zones. Remember that maritime presence is important for your trade. Army logistics and navy logistics. The way this works is you have to assign an army that has auxiliaries. These are units that are specialized in making sure that they gather food from the provinces nearby and they make sure your main fighting armies have that particular food so they don't starve during the campaign. And they only gather when it's possible, and they will move it to deposits in any supply depot you have set in that targeted area. Naval logistics, basically the same thing. They gather food at a nearby source and then go to the target sea zone and act as logistic support for the armies. You probably want to assign to these particular objectives armies that are not frontline units and just support units or auxiliaries, as Johan calls them. Supporting objectives. There's a lot of supporting objectives that are primarily used by the AI, like join units, maintain troop levels, etc. Chase target. This can be done when you see an enemy unit and wish to follow it and engage it. If it runs out of morale from movement or the enemy manages to escape into the fog of war, it may be lost. So this particular objective is only good whenever you have complete control over the provinces. There's no fog of war. So for example, let's say the Prussians are invading France, right? And you have obviously control of all of your French provinces, and the Prussians are in the middle of France somehow. You will be able to chase them all the way to the borders of your lands. If they've run away back into Prussian lands, your objective is going to get canceled because you don't see what's happening there. And that's actually good because you might get baited and you might get stack wiped. Automatic fleet transport, basically exactly the same like it is in E4 and Imperator. Repatriate units is something new. This is an action that you can do whenever your navies or armies are exiled. So that's black flagged, quote unquote, as we know in EU4, and it allows these units to get home as soon as possible when you assign this particular objective. Johan apparently declared war on Victoria 3 by saying that, of course, there's manual control. Manual control is literally what makes grand strategy games fun. Hint, hint, because, you know, Vicky 3 doesn't necessarily have that much or any manual control for that matter. Understandable, sir. And I'm pretty self-explanatory with where Johan stands on the matter, so you guys don't need to worry about Vicky 3 combat system making its way to EU5. That is not the case, confirmed from the literal main developer of the game. I guess the word would be director of the game, right? Mentions how attrition is not a major problem with the new logistics system. It's basically the same same system as it is in Imperator. As long as you have enough food, you're likely not going to lose any units, or very, very few units. If, let's say, you're passing through impassable terrain or something of the sorts, right, through mountains and such, then you might lose a small trickle of it, but majority of units are going to pass through as long as you have food. The second you lose that food is when you really get massive attrition issues. Somebody asks about diseases. Is there going to be a Tinto talk on that? And Johan says, yes, of course. Wait for a few weeks. So we're going to see a disease dev diary in a few weeks for EU5. Now, I did promise I'm going to tell you guys what the strongest armies are going to be at the start of the campaign. Obviously, Yuan is going to be number one, and I'm using, of course, the extended timeline to show the 1337 start date. Yuan is insanely overpowered, and we already have some sneak peeks from the previous dev diaries, as well as from some of the comments that the developers have made, that Yuan is going to have indeed a lot of rebellions, but also will start with a huge amount of troops. Now, following this is going to be the Golden Horde, or the White Horde, Blue Horde, as is shown in this particular mod. They divided it in the mod, but as we know, it is not going to be a divided entity in the game itself. It's going to be one massive horde that should technically have about 40 to 50,000 soldiers. After that, of course, we would likely see Delhi with similar 60 around 1,000 units, and then right after that, likely the English and the French with about the same amount of troops, roughly 30 to 40,000 on both sides. These would be the biggest armies at the start in EU5, and then everything else aside from this is going to be significantly smaller. In Europe itself, I'd say that likely Hungary is going to have about 20 to 30,000, and I know what you guys are thinking. Ludi, what are you talking about? It should be 50, 60, 100,000. My dude, no, it shouldn't, okay? I'm actually talking about historical references here. I'm not talking about fictional books, okay? Getting 40,000 units in 1337 was actually huge. Even the Ottomans likely will have 8 to 10,000 units maximum at the start date. Byzantines too, probably about 7,000, 8,000, give or take. Remember, they came out of a civil war, and if it's scripted, they should have a couple more civil wars afterward. So let's see what happens. Now, seeing as the Japanese will be portrayed as one nation that has multiple building daimyos, as I like to call them, essentially nations that are buildings that own land, but it is portrayed as one main nation. Considering that all of these daimyos had pretty significant sized standing retinues, and then the obvious shogun and the emperor also had their own retinues, all of those together means that the Japanese will likely start with 30,000, maybe even more than that themselves, considering the population was pretty high in this particular period as well. And one that I think might surprise some people is Morocco might have quite a few units, because at this particular time, Morocco was actually getting ready for an attempt of invading Iberia to help out Granada, perhaps even take back some of the lands from the Castilian crown. A failed invasion that ended up in just a few months with the Moroccan army getting wiped out by the Castilians, bringing to a massive hold the Marinid expansion, that's for sure. Now, that's going to be it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Love you all, and I'll see you in the next one.